Good morning. Happy Friday to everybody in the stream. Got some big familiar names in the chat as always. Netstar is going to take position number 1 with the first to hit the good morning. The GM in the chat from Netstar. Thank you for that. Kicking us off strong. After that, we've got Big Boss, Ida, Stefan, B Supreme, Tarushi, VK, Mauricio, Dan Wall. Nice to see you, Dan. Diana. Nice to see you, Diana. Couch Potato, Jason, Roger. We've got Vincent. Other Dan, Dan Lapel, yo, good morning to you. SRF, nice to see. He asks a question as well. Am I a professional trader? I'm as professional as you think I am. I'll leave it at that. Ivan, Brad, Ionut, J. King, Adrian. Good morning. Good morning all. So we've got a pretty early start this morning. We're probably going to get to some requests later on in the stream. You guys know what that means. If we can hit that threshold of roughly, 150 likes, I get it. There's only about 50 of you guys in the stream right now. It's fine. Over the course of some time, we'll see if we can get there. But about 150 likes, we'll take some requests towards the end of the stream once we get through all the material I want to cover for you guys on a Friday. So let's kick things off as we always do. What do we have on the docket for economic events? Absolutely nothing, right? Nothing on a Friday. No big surprises today. That's a good thing. The other thing I would point out about it being a Friday, as always, it's a day to sort of take it easy, right? If you've got some profits from earlier on in the week, that's fine. Good. I mean, congratulations. That's obviously what we're looking for. But protect those profits. Don't do anything silly on a Friday that would potentially lead to them evaporating and you going into the weekend with a pretty negative mindset. You don't want to have a negative mindset into the weekend, so dial it back just a little bit. If you're looking to trade 0 DTE options, I would probably look to only trade with profits you have this week. Don't dip back down into that account balance. So again, careful with those 0 DTEs. Data will come and bite you if, things start going sideways. But again, if you've got a little bit of cushion, that's okay to take a little bit of a risk with some of those options. So we'll see what ultimately unfolds. But on this economic calendar, we can see no big surprises today. So let's just keep things rolling right along. Let's carry on over to our earnings. Of course, Biofrontera is the one that's going to report before the bell. I'm not sure if they already did. We can check in on that chart just to see if there's some sort of gap. But as we know, really just maybe something to watch, not necessarily trade. It doesn't really strike me as a solid opportunity, regardless of if a gap was produced or not. So earnings pretty quiet out there. We've got some more names rolling into the chat. Nice to see you all. Sonam, Dorji, and Memjj. MEMJJ. We're just going to call you JJ because I think that sounds a little bit better than butchering that pronunciation. So let's continue along, get into the bread and butter of what we're always doing. We're going to check in on our ES futures. And again, we'll probably cover these closer towards the bell again. I know it is a little bit earlier than normal. It's about 8:35. So we'll check back in closer to the bell. But for now, let's just get a quick grasp on where we're at. Again, the 3 questions are always going to guide us. Question number 1, where are we opening in relationship to yesterday's range? Here's yesterday's high. Here's yesterday's low. Where are we opening? Certainly in the upper third, but we are not opening on a true gap up or a true gap down. So we'll put a little bit of a diagonal arrow higher, about 45 degrees if my eyeballs serve me correct on this Friday morning. And, it's got to be a little bit more bullish than bearish, simply noting that we've held up here in the upper third in the overnight sort of range, but it's not like we have potential for shock and awe gapping outside of yesterday's range. So question number 1, neutral to slightly bullish. Question number 2, where are we opening in relationship to the overnight range? So we're going to take it one step further, right? Here we go. There's your overnight high. There's your overnight low. Where are we currently? I would say we're getting pretty darn close to the midpoint of the overnight range, which again has to be a bit more of a neutral indication. So that's not really telling us a whole lot. It's rather, balanced in the overnight. And that leads directly into question number 3, which would be what is the inventory position of the overnight traders? And what you can see here is that it's actually net long, right? So here's the close. Oops, that's actually the first overnight bar. The close would be right here. And you can see it's net long, right? So there's a little bit of activity that happens below, but a majority of the activity happens above, right? So we would call that slightly skewed net long. Maybe it's something like, 80-20 net long. So we'll put an 8-2 here, net long. Regardless, based on the answers to these 3 questions right here, as of right now, 8:35 and 50 seconds, according to my clock in the top right-hand corner, we've got a patience on the open, right? We've got to be a little bit patient on the open. Interesting. Nonetheless, Patience on the open should be required. We'll wait and see. I do think that the market's trying to resolve this pullback higher. We'll talk about why as we get through some of the sectors, some other things that we can look at here for indications. Overall, I mean, the sell yesterday was fairly weak. Notice how it was really grindy down here towards the lows, especially if I just clear that up for a second, we can talk about this. We know that this was a weak level, right? We knew that we had this support. We had the overnight low there as well. And when we cracked it, there was zero follow through. And as a matter of fact, we put in a perfect double bottom at the prior day's low. So the sellers just really aren't there. I mean, if the sellers were there, it should have really went underneath that overnight low, at least on like the first 15-minute bar, right to the prior day's low. That was my expectation. It simply didn't happen, right? So when certain things do not happen, the market's trying to tell you something. The market's speaking to you. So the stronger sellers just aren't there at the lows of this pullback. So does it mean we can go higher? Potentially, right? It's something that we can watch out for into today's session. If we were to get, we want the zoom tool, not the hand. Apologies for that. If we get some sort of opening balance up here, something that's well above value area high, notice that value is way down here. We're slated to be opening above value. Again, a little bit more of a bullish indication as well, but we covered that with question number 1. But regardless, if we start putting in a pressure cooker top and ascending triangle off the morning balance, this level to me starts striking me as a breakout point, right? Noting that we would start to rally off of this pullback. So it's something that I'm thinking about throughout the course of the day. I wouldn't necessarily be skewed overly bearish on today's session. We'll see if things develop and we push back down into yesterday's range firmly, into yesterday's value. That to me is more of, even just that is more of a neutral indication, noting that in here, we have a lot of value. I mean, basically yesterday's entire range was the value area, right? Right in here. So if we come back in here, I'm expecting chop. I don't really see that as an overly bearish indication. Maybe it's a failed move higher, but nonetheless, we would just need more information, right? Waiting for that next move. As of right now, we do look slated to be opening more bullish than bearish. So we're not going to just automatically assume we're going to do something like that, right? So that's what I've got for you on the ES futures so far. Again, we'll check in maybe closer towards that bell since we got a little bit of a head start this morning. Let's do our poll as always, though. So let me know what you guys are thinking in the chat today. If you think it's going to be a number 1, you know the deal. It's going to be a breakout. It's going to move higher. We're going to get into some of those upper targets. Drop me a number 1 in the chat. If you think it's going to be a more neutral day, so maybe we do a little ping pong here, we test value area high, maybe we even dip into value area. I know I'm drawing in the next day's session, but you get my gist, right? A balanced day, not really moving too much. Drop me a number 2 in the chat. And then you know the deal. You bears out there, straight down, drop me a 3. If you think it's a combination of any of these, drop me a number dash a number. So if you think it's going to be a 2 that turns into a 1, drop a 2-1. If you think it's going to be a 3 that then reverses back up to a 2, drop a 3-2, so on and so forth, right? So I'll give it a second. Let some answers come into the chat. As we're doing that, we're coming up on 100 viewers in the stream. As I was pointing out earlier, and we had less people here, we're going to take some ticker requests because we got a head start today. But to get to those ticker requests, we do need the like button to get some love and get up and over that 150 threshold. So we'll see if we can get it there. I get it. Again, I get it. We don't even have 150 people in here yet, but let's see if we can get a strong start. So scrolling up to the top of our responses so far, we got Tarushi kicking us off with a number 1. Stefan, 2-1. We've got some 1s, 2s, lots of 1s and 2s rolling into the chat. Mauricio's giving us that first 3. There's always got to be one of them. And lots of 2-1s, 2-1, 2 then 1, 1 then 3 from NetStar. I always think it's interesting when someone picks the 2 extremes because basically what that's telling us is you think that it's going to be an outside day. An outside day is something that's pretty difficult to come by, especially when the day prior was a pretty large range, right? You're talking about all the way from 44.45 up to 45.20. It's not quite 100 points, but you know, it's pretty darn close. 80-point range here. That's a big deal. So you're assuming that the range is going to continue to expand and basically give us maybe an 120-point day. That's what an outside day would imply as of right now. I'm not saying it can't happen. It's just that those things are fairly rare. Nonetheless, it's a valid response. If that's what you think, then that's what you think. So we've got some more 2s and 3s rolling in as I drag it out and talk about that outside day. But nonetheless, I think the overwhelming response from the chat was ones and twos, or twos turning into ones, so on and so forth. So my sort of thinking for the day, just to give you what I'm thinking about, if there is a move lower, because we are opening inside of this overnight range at the midpoint, if it moves lower, I want to see us support at value area high. If so, I'm looking for any bullish excuse to get long up and over yesterday's highs. That would sort of confirm the daily pullback buy, and there's a reason to go long there, right? We're basically moving away from these lows. We've seen a reasonable pullback after a very strong momentum-driven move to the upside. Let me quickly show you that on the daily time frame chart here. I mean, guys, look at this. It's pretty hard to argue that this is anything other than a bull flag, right? So if we can start taking out these highs right here, then we're looking for at least an equal high right around that area, closer to 45.80. All right, that would at least give us an equal high on the daily time frame and potentially give us the opportunity for a higher low pullback in the very short term that produces something like this, inverted head and shoulders. Your next breakout point is here for the next leg higher, essentially, of this move. So that's how I'm thinking about this on a step-by-step basis, right? If you're trying to think about the market like a game of chess, this is kind of what you think about, right? So if we do this and put in the equal high, that sets up the opportunity, again, for this. That would be like thinking one step ahead. What's my opponent's next move in chess, right? And then if that happens and we do this, we know it's bullish, right? If we can't get there, and we produce a lower high from here to here to here, then it's okay. If we crack this low, we know we're still in a downtrend. Maybe this is going to develop into more than just a pullback, right? So trying to stay one step ahead, thinking about it like a game of chess. Hopefully that was a useful analogy. We're going to continue along, keep moving here, get into some of our sectors over on this side of the screen. So XLK is up first, as always, for our tech sector. Again, some of these things are pointing to the possibility for a move back higher. So you can see we've got two equal highs here. We're trying to resolve the neckline of this double bottom from in the past, even as we took out the prior day's low, so the Wednesday low on the Thursday session. When we break that, notice that there was no aggressive acceleration in selling. To me, that's a pretty, the market's speaking to you. Again, if you're trying to read what the market's saying, think about what happens and also what does not happen. So we do not accelerate under the break of the prior day's low, and we rally back up and close right on the level. To me, it's a little bit more bullish than bearish, right? If it was bearish, the sellers should have taken advantage of that. We were firmly underneath the neckline. They would have materialized. They didn't. If we look at the activity that happened on yesterday's session too, this is going to be a common thread through about everything we're going to look at here. Let me drop this to a 15-minute actually. There we go. That's a little bit better. What I want to point out here is that although we did have a hammer-esque type candle that printed on Wednesday, notice that that was only produced by some volatility from the FOMC. It was not a clear reaction from the buyers. Notice the difference on the green response here from the buyers on yesterday's session. It was down and then it was straight up. Buyers responded at these lower prices. They took control and it was higher. Okay, we're going to notice that across multiple sectors. Let's quickly take a look at the XLF. I think it's really obvious here. I mean, this one's as clear as it gets, right? So an indecision doji the prior day. Sure, we closed green, we closed above the open, but how was it produced? Look at all this choppy, nasty action. Here, the sellers tried to make a stand. Don't get me wrong, it was very bearish underneath that 37.50. But as the buyers respond, it's domination from the buyers, right? There is no back and forth activity here. There is no wishy-washy. I'm not sure if the buyers are in control, the sellers are in control. No, none of that, right? Strong response from the buyers. We're back above the level. In the pre-market, we're slightly opening on a gap up. Bullish indication, right? So that's what we've got there. So let's continue along. What other sectors do we have that are pretty important? Well, how about the XLY? Notice what we have here as well. Again, a lower wick on the Wednesday session. We have the sell, and then all the lower wick is only produced by some volatility from the FOMC. Look at the clear difference that we have here. Okay, so the buyers clearly find a level where they're interested in buying. They step up and dominate into the close, a much more bullish indication, right? So what I'm getting at here is that yesterday's activity was a clear reversal instead of just a volatile reversal that we saw on Wednesday's activity. Now, again, there are no guarantees in the market. It doesn't mean that the market has to scream higher, but this to me is adding some more confidence to the idea that longs should be favorable as we move forward here. If we can start taking out these two-day highs, longs are favorable, right? We can see that the sellers failed. The buyers responded in a firm manner and not just a volatile manner. So to me, that's what I'm thinking about as we head into this morning's open. The sectors, they're looking pretty darn good based on the reversals that we saw yesterday, based on the fact that a majority of them are back above those critical inflection points that we talked about on the Wednesday video. Again, things are looking like there's a bit of a turn here in the marketplace. Last one that we want to check in on is going to be the XLV for healthcare. Just want to point out we have a new all-time high, right? That is absolutely fantastic. Heavyweight sector here. If I go ahead and grab a little bit more than 3 months, let's go to the year-day chart. There we go. You can see we're up and over that. New all-time high. Could it pull back? Yeah, absolutely. A little bit of pullback would be fine here. There's no major risk in the XLV tanking the marketplace. I mean, making a brand new all-time high, incredibly bullish. Look at how it's forming itself in the pre-market here, holding up at these highs instead of already breaking back down. So XLV, could it pull back? Yes. Is it the end of the world if it pulls back? No. Are the pre-market indications indicating that there's going to be a massive pullback? No. Okay. So as of right now, the sectors are looking pretty darn good. Right? Pretty darn good. So let's just round it out. Take a quick look at our SPY itself. And again, this is basically the same thing as the ES. Everything that we talked about in the ES is going to ring true here, but this might be a little bit more familiar. Here's your daily bull flag, right? Failure to really find acceptance here, 2 equal lows, so a double bottom. We filled the gap structure overhead, so we can actually remove the bottom of that gap, and this is now our resistance, right? Yesterday's high. Let's flip that to a gray level. There we go. And if we can clear that, it's about the resistance trend line, right? If we can get into that and break it, that's where the next leg, I would imagine, starts to be kicked off on this bull flag breakout. So in terms of levels to be watching here, again, basically, for all intents and purposes, your value area high is roughly around 447.75. As long as you're above that, again, there's that pullback, potentially doing something like this, back up to yesterday's high, and then a break for something that does that. So to me, anything that holds up above value area today, it looks bullish, right? It looks bullish. It's as simple as that. If you want to be a little bit more conservative, then wait for the break of the overnight high, break of yesterday's high. It would also be a recapture of this daily flush point, and then it's off to the races to the resistance trend line, right? So that's what I'm thinking about here on our Friday session. Again, as we pointed out, a number of the reversals that we saw yesterday on the Thursday session are looking pretty darn good from the buyers. So the only reason to get short biased on this marketplace is if we take out this double bottom. Because it's a double bottom, it is in fact a weak level, right? I will give you that. If you're someone who's looking for shorts and an opportunity to go short this market, it's got to be a breakdown of the double bottom. That's the only reason I could see to go short this market. Currently, based on how everything's aligning right now, you could see, quite clearly, I hope I've made the case that any consolidation above value area strikes me as bullish, and then we're looking for breakouts. Right? The only short trade is underneath the 2-day lows. If we take a look at our market profile, so quickly on over here, yeah, value was overlapping, right? Value was overlapping. You can see the point of control is overlapping as well. However, as long as we're above this kind of area right here, overnight low, value area high, I think it's bullish consolidation and a break. The only bear trade is taking out that poor low right in here. It's not technically a poor low, it's a mechanical weak low is what we would call it on market profile, just because there are two very nuanced levels here. Notice also there was so this is another thing that I should point out here. As we crack this level, right, the overnight low, look at what happened with the volume down at the very lows of the session. Look at how dramatic that taper is. I'm not sure if you can see it on your screen, so I'll outline it with that white sort of marker, if you will. Here's the value, boom. It goes to basically zero at the lows here. No one was willing to participate, short or long, at the lows of yesterday's session. No one wanted to do business here. To me, that's another indication to carry forward. So that's pretty much going to round out our S&P analysis. Hopefully that was useful and has you, thinking about the right things as we head into the bell. Let's get back on over to the platform, round out the broad market with the QQQ, and see what's going on in the rest of the world essentially here. So you can clearly see, just like we talked about in the SPY, we do have that more serious reversal on yesterday's session, right off the 50 SMA. We're back above that 352. We closed above it, right? That's a bullish thing to me. You'll notice, though, that the QQQ did not fill its gap overhead. So that's the primary objective of this chart. If we can take out the 2-day highs, the overnight high, yesterday's high, this 357 area, you're looking for the gap to fill about 3 points up towards 360. That's your long trade to watch out for on today's session, right? That's what we're watching for if this gets a break to the upside. If it consolidates, it needs to remain above 352. There's no way around it this time. It's got to be above it. If it starts dipping back down underneath, more of a bearish indication in the QQQ, right? So that's what we've got there. IWM is up next for our Russell 2000 and the small caps. Hammer candle, right? Hammer candle right off of our trend line. So it's got to hold here. If it goes back down underneath the trend line and it gives us one of these on today's session, a bear close back at yesterday's lows, that rhymes, don't call me a poet, then we know it's filling up the triangle, right? Likely back down towards 193.50. However, if it doesn't go back down underneath the support trend line, look for resistance overhead at the bottom of the gap, 50 SMA, Wednesday's high. If it breaks, there is a small gap to be filled, but as you know, in IWM, to me, it's all about 204. Why is it 204? Well, we know that's a head and shoulders pattern, right? That's your neckline. So until we can recapture the neckline, I still have to give it to the bears here in IWM. This has seen much more of an aggressive pullback. If you think about this as the context of the bull flag that we see in the SPY and the QQQ, the IWM has already failed it, right? Already failed it. So it's got to prove itself up and over 204 before I'm more comfortable about thinking about longs in IWM and the small caps and more of a risk-on signal for equities, right? So IWM, it's got some work to do, but I do like the hammer off of the support trend line. Let's see if we can get a little bit more confirmation back over 204. We'll see how the weekly bar closes out, right? Pre-market indications, again, not really telling us a whole lot, opening in range, underneath the highs, probably right around the top of value area. I would imagine that this equates to much more value than this up here. So same sort of idea as what we just discussed in the ES and the QQQ. All right, that's our broad market. I'm quickly going to take a look at our chat questions, and then we will get into the core list of companies. For anyone new tuning into the stream, we've got about 175 people in here now. We will be taking chart requests towards the end since we started early today. However, we need to get the likes up and over 150, and don't drop the requests in the chat yet. Drop them when I tell you to. That way they don't get lost, and we will go in chronological order. So that's what we've got. So quickly taking a look through our chat. Some more people rolling in. Familiar names. We've got Robin. Nice to see you. Keith, Chris Hunt, Dark Lynch, Captain G, Philip number 1. We've got Blackface, DJ RJ. Good morning. Roni, Brad, Eric Booyah. Good morning to you. ABD, as always. Nice to see you, ABD. Kyle and Romeo, Stan, Paul. Good to see you guys. All right, so it looks like there weren't too many questions in there. Just some comments, which I always appreciate all the comments. Is the market profile on Thinkorswim? I struggle to find a study for it. There is a market profile study in Thinkorswim. Maybe towards the end of the stream I'll bring it up. But nonetheless, it's the volume profile. It's not technically market profile, all right? Let's continue along. Vincent asks about the pointer tool. That's a separate presentation app, Vincent. It's called Demo Pro for Mac. It's not in Thinkorswim. So let's get into the core list of companies. Apple's up first on the docket. Again, you can see here how although we had an indecision bar on the Wednesday session, the way that it formed is much different. So again, Fed volatility, whereas here, clear response from the buyers. That strikes me as slightly more bullish, right? In the pre-market, you'll notice, and this level is not really as important anymore. We're going to remove that. In the pre-market, you'll notice we're hovering above the double, like if you wanted to classify that as a double bottom, your neckline would technically be somewhere down here, 170, 150s. I would just use that as a nice round number. Let's go ahead and pop that on. And the reason I'm picking this level is not only was it the double bottom sort of, you could call it a double, you could call it a number of things actually, now that I'm looking at it. You could call it an inverted head and shoulders here. You could call it a double bottom, 1-2, break of the neckline. Regardless, it doesn't really matter. You can see that there's some structure around that level, resistance, resistance. As we break, retest, and then go, it holds as support. So as long as we're above 170, 152, strikes me as a bullish consolidation zone, and we're of course looking for that gap to fill overhead as the long trade on the Friday. Anything that takes out the 2-day lows, yes, that is bearish, and we're looking for the 50 SMA on the daily. Current pre-market indications would say because we're above that 170, 150, I would look for the long opportunity first. So that's what we've got there. Let's continue along, talk about Netflix. Good morning, Josh DePina. Always got to shout out my guys who have the green name, green cash bag, supporting the channel. I appreciate you. So what do we see in Netflix? Again, hammer candle right at a critical must-hold area here. I think I've got the wrong settings. So here's a quick tip. Whenever your chart won't adjust, it's probably because you have a study that's throwing things off. If you go into settings, go into price axis, and turn off fit studies and markers, like that, we now have a much more reasonable chart. So a quick tip. You're learning something new on a Friday morning. Anyways, hammer candle on yesterday's session. Inverted head and shoulders is still technically in play because we're above that level. 362.34 needs to hold in the pre-market. We're actually dipping back down underneath that level. Slightly concerning. The more acceptance we get underneath 362.35, the more bearish the chart becomes, right? Giving up this structure right here, giving this up as a range that's failed now. So acceptance underneath, which again, currently looks like the likely case. Oops, we want to do that. You can see that red candle is starting to dip below. Not the most promising indication. Inside of Netflix, I would be patient and really watch for a recapture at minimum of 370, 369.50 if this is going to pan out as a look below and fail, right? Something that does this. It needs to prove itself a little bit more up and over 370 for the longs. And again, acceptance down here strikes me as more bearish based on the daily structure. So that's what we've got in Netflix. Continuing along, Tesla. What do we see in Tesla? Zooming in, zooming in. We did fill the downside gap yesterday, which was fairly interesting. We filled it basically to the tick and then reversed back to the upside here. Again, the indecision and lower wick on this candle strikes me as much more important based on the seriousness of that buying activity. We will still be using our 1055 area as a pivot. Why is that? Well, if you come on down to like a 5-minute time frame, let's go here and do it actually. 2 days is fine, but we want 5 minutes. There we go. What you'll notice on the 5, if we zoom in, let's be a little bit more nuanced here. So break, retest, and go in the morning, right? So that was a solid trade. We talked about that setup in yesterday's live stream. What did we see to the downside? Same thing. Break, retest, go, right? So you can see 1055 is starting to be important. What happened in the afternoon? Break, retest, hold into the post-market, right? So 1056, 1055 is a fairly important level here, an inflection point inside of Tesla. So if we go back on up to a 15-minute time frame, you'll notice that we're back down underneath that level. You can see it was a shelf of support in the pre-market, and now, if we just zoom in, what would this inverted hammer indicate? We have a break and retest on something like a 5-minute, and it's now failing back lower. So on Tesla, use this as your sort of level. If we're above, lean on longs, maybe it fills the gap overhead. If we're below, look for the flush underneath the 2-day lows, and your first target is here, the outside bar of the double inside bar setup. That low is at 978.50, right? So Tesla, it's all about 1055. If we're above, great. If we're below, not so great for longs. That's what I've got in Tesla. I don't know if anyone watched the Cyber Rodeo last night. Pretty cool stuff from Elon. Great stuff there. So that's what we've got in Tesla. AMD is up next. We're doing great on time. It's not even 9 o'clock, guys. We're doing fantastic today. Continuing along on AMD, you can see we've got sort of, it's not quite an inside bar, but it is a doji inside of a doji. Again, the reversal yesterday strikes me as much more important. Zooming in here, pre-market, as long as we hold this level, we're going to go ahead and pop that on. 103.22, bullish consolidation above, looking for a break of these 2-day highs essentially to start to get to, back up to 110. That structural area, right? So that's what we've got to the upside. If we can get consolidation above 103.22, if it breaks to the downside, I would just look for some sort of dribble back lower towards 100. I wouldn't look for shorts here, noting what's already happened there. I don't think it's wise to be chasing it short at these lows. The next short would be okay. If we can put in a clear lower high, then break 100 to the downside, that's probably the next short in AMD. But again, that requires patience around that big round number, right? 100. So use 103.25 as your first pivot, longs above for the 2-day high break. Fantastic. Below, more choppy, neutral, only bearish if we crack 100, which again, I don't think is the wisest thing to look for on today's session. Facebook's up next. What do we see in Facebook? 200 people in the stream, chat, I suppose, too. Nice to see all you guys. It's fantastic to see everybody tuning in on a Friday. So what do we see in Facebook, right? Hammer candle on yesterday's session. We did technically flush the lows here, so some people would classify that as cleaning up weak-handed longs, right? You flush this, you stop out everyone who had a stop in here, and then you bring it back higher, cleaning out the weak-handed longs. I don't necessarily know if I believe in that type of theory. Nonetheless, we have a hammer candle, right? It's holding up at support. We closed back above that 222.17. Strikes me as bullish. If we can get back above this breakout point here, 225.50, you can see I have an alert set because I'm watching this trade. We know that there's thin structure here, and then there's even a gap overhead to trade for. So to me, the breakout in Facebook is if we can get acceptance up and over 225.50s, and what that might look like is consolidation here. A break and retest looks great to buy it on the pullback. If we get some sort of beautiful consolidation type pattern just below, the breakout looks good. That's what I'm watching out for inside of Facebook. If it moves lower, back down underneath 222.17, 222 even we'll call it, then fine, let it do its thing. The next support you need to see hold is 217. 217 in Facebook. And we know that because on the daily, if we scrunch up the chart just a little bit, you can see we have support, which then flips to resistance, which is then resistance here for the big breakout. As long as we hold 217, fine in Facebook. Fine in Facebook. So those are my thoughts there. Again, watching that 225.50 level like a hawk. Nvidia's up next. What do we see there? What do we see there? So a hammer candle off of our support trend line. Again, this pullback has been much more aggressive than what I would have liked to see. But again, the market doesn't always play by the rules. So we got to deal with what they're giving us here. Nonetheless, basically on this one, I think it's a patience play. There's not really two-day highs that are stacked nicely like other stocks that we've looked at so far. We're not even sitting at like an inflection. I suppose maybe. It's a tough one to call here in Nvidia as to whether or not this 247 level will be in play. Notice just because we have this upper wick into the close, we have some wicks here into the close of Wednesday as well with all of that Fed volatility. I think it's going to be a more difficult trade to pull off long. So I'm not as excited about watching Nvidia this morning. This one's got a little bit of work to do in my estimation. It's got to prove itself and get closer to that gap. I think the next long trade is for the gap fill and potentially targeting the resistance trend line after that. It's got to prove itself a little bit here. It's getting tangled up around the moving averages, got a little bit more price acceptance than what I would have liked to see underneath the neckline of the double bottom. Sure, again, it is supporting at the support trend line, and the reversal is just as solid as anything else that we saw out there. But based on the daily structure, I'm just not quite seeing it yet as to what the trade could be. Maybe, just maybe, it's a break of this resistance trend line right here, right? So if you crack this, which has been fairly well respected as of right now. If you crack that, maybe it's a long, and the target's up here, could potentially be something like that. But again, I think there are just better opportunities with two-day equal highs that are stacked right now, or better intraday inflection points we can watch. I'm not quite sure that Nvidia is at the top of my list for this morning. So that's what I've got there for you. Apologies if this is like your favorite stock or something. I'm just not seeing it as of right now. Inside of Microsoft, I loved the recapture of 299 yesterday. This one showed extreme relative strength on the open, whereas some other things were choppy and kind of took some time to resolve. This one was just clearly higher, reasonable pullback that then confirmed 299 as support, and now we're getting consolidation above in the after hours. So to me, as long as 299 continues to hold, fantastic. We're technically above the support trend line on an intraday only. Let's go, oops, we don't want that. All over the place with the mouse, apologies. Let's go here. So this is the 15-minute no after hours on. You can see we're currently right at that. We're at that level, right? And in the pre-market, we're 369 cents. So right around in here, we've got to get back above. That would strike me as a bullish thing. As of right now, we're there's really some solid strength in Microsoft. Note the relative strength, right? So I like what's unfolding here. Again, this was one of those ones that we were looking for all of that super support trendline, 50 SMA, horizontal level. It's all at the same spot. Right? It's all at the same spot. So as long as 299 continues to hold, I do think that this can continue to potentially come up and fill that gap overhead. 307 up to 309.82. That's what I'm watching for inside of Microsoft. Looks good for now. Again, the only reason to get bearish on these stocks is if we break the two-day lows. Microsoft, you can see they're equal. If that cracks, your next support is here around 290. Obviously, a much more bearish implication for the stock overall. Next and lastly, we've got Amazon. Last but not least, the beast, as always. This one's in an interesting spot as well, more similar to Nvidia. Let me go ahead and pop on those extended hour sessions again. Again, solid reversal, I will give it that, but notice where we've closed underneath. Remember that we were talking about 31.76 for the longest time. Right? It's the weekly structural lows. If I come over to here, I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but we've talked about this level for so long. We closed back down underneath, right? So to me, not ideal. We want to see if on today's session we can close the weekly bar back above 31.76. That is the number to beat on today's session. If we take a look back at the daily time frame, again, we do have a hammer candle. It is supporting at the 50 SMA, this horizontal level from in here. It's got to show improve and get back above that 31.76. From there, the next trade is the gap fill and then the resistance trend line, right? So Amazon kind of falling more similar into that Nvidia camp, and a little bit more patience required, right? I need to see this one. The long is probably up and over yesterday's high. You can see this as clear resistance here, clear resistance here. Sure, we have a couple of upper wicks, but more like, or rather not so much like Nvidia. They're all at equal levels instead of having like one here, one here, one here, which is kind of in between, then one back over here. This one's a little bit more clean, right? So if we can take out 3203, that's where you probably move closer to that gap overhead. If we remain inside of range here, not the best indication from the weekly time frame closing back down underneath 3176. All right, so that's what we've got for our core list of companies. I've got a couple of trade ideas that I wanted to show you. Well, not a couple, but really just one on Twitter, TWTR, and then we'll take a look and see if we hit that 150 like mark. We've got 240 people in the stream now, which is fantastic. We should easily be able to hit that 150 likes. Then we'll take some requests. Again, don't drop them in the chat yet. We'll wait a second, right? Wait a second, a little bit of patience. So Twitter, the reason I bring this chart up is because now, excuse me, the lows are fairly equal right around this area at 46.80, 46.50. If that starts breaking down, and again, in the pre-market, you can already see the sort of slump here, we're getting close, right? We're getting pretty darn close. So if this breaks down, then we have a massive gap underneath to be trading for, right? That's all I'm kind of pointing out here. Yeah, we love Elon, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't close the gap, right? So yes, John G, big H pattern. Now, traditionally, we don't really count the overnight too much, but yeah, based on, if we do this, we can kind of imagine what the open's going to look like here. So here's the 15-minute no extended hours. We're going to be opening here. If we do something like this and then roll back over lower highs, yeah, there's your H pattern, right? Flush this, move into the gap below. So it's a trade to be watching out for. There's just a lot of deltas to pick up in here. There's virtually no structure. Maybe the chart starts to correct just a little bit. All right, so something to watch out for. Obviously, if we remain in this range, it's just neutral. It's not necessarily a long either. It's just neutral, right? So that's Twitter. Now, before we take some requests, and guys, I said do not drop them in the chat yet. I'm not going to count anything that comes into the chat until I say that magic word. What I want to do for, I forget who exactly requested it. However, we're going to talk about volume profile on the daily time frame, okay? If you come into your studies, I've got a set already made up for it. It's called the V profile. I'm going to click use set, and I just want to quickly show you guys the settings that I have here, okay? So this is what we have, okay? Inputs, I believe most of this is default. I just wanted to show you kind of where mine's set. Automatic, row heights 1, I mean, all this stuff is fine. Time per profile is chart, so whatever your chart is set to, that's what it will grab. Multiplier, again, I usually, you can hover the little cursors here and see what these things mean. I don't even think it's worth changing. This is just telling you how many profiles you'll be grabbing. If you want to show the point of control, you can. So we'll turn that to yes. Show value area, I'll just turn that to yes. Value area percent should always be 70, and you can change the opacity of what that actually looks like, all right? So, and then down underneath, of course, if you want your point of control to be red, it's red. If you want it to be something other than a line, you can change it to, you can make all these changes as you would any other Thinkorswim study, all right? And the reason we're doing this is because it's 9:07. We've got plenty of time, and I feel like this might be valuable for anyone who doesn't necessarily want to open up a Trade-of-8 account just for market profile, okay? So you can go through all these settings like you would anything else, your value area, high value area, low colors, how it's going to be denoted on the chart, all of that stuff, all right? So we're going to click OK. Mine's already set up here. I'll click OK. And just like that, you're getting a volume profile on the entirety of this from here all the way down to, it's the entirety of the chart that you have on your screen. So for us, it's the 1 year day, right? If you wanted to look at just yesterday's activity, you would drop it down to a smaller time frame. Let's go with like a 1 day, 5 minute. This is essentially what we have on the market profile here, right? So take a quick look. Again, it's not going to be exact because obviously it's measuring different things here based on candles versus TPOs. But look at the general distribution here. Value area is slightly lower. Point of control is kind of the midpoint of the value area. And then look at our market profile here. You can see the comparison, right? So you get your value area, which is right here. Point of control is that red line, and it's basically the same thing, right? So that's kind of how that works. Hopefully that was useful. I don't use the monkey bars on Thinkorswim. I don't really have much experience with the monkey bars in Thinkorswim, so I can't really comment on them. For me, it was just because I trade futures here at Trade-of-8 anyways. It was just a sort of a blessing that they also offer TPO market profile charts. The other thing that they offer are these cool footprint charts, and this will take a second to load here. But depending on how deep you want to get into order flow, they've got the tools for you. Okay, it's not as customizable as something like Ninja, Jigsaw, or what's the other one there? Sierra chart. It's not as customizable as that stuff, but it's got a pretty good gamut for 0 platform fees. All right. So just wanted to point that out. You can get as deep or not deep as you want with all the order flow stuff, but the tools are there if you're interested. Back on over to the platform, I'm going to set this back to our set with this. I'm just going to quickly get rid of the 20, and we'll go back to a 1 year day. All right, so I believe we should probably be at over 150 likes. Let's quickly check in on it. Yeah, you guys killed it. Absolutely killed it this morning. 187 likes. Fantastic, guys. I appreciate that. Let's take some requests now. So as soon as I start seeing things come into the chat with ticker requests, we're going to start now, okay? So as we give it a second here to let those come in, let me just address a couple of questions here. ES is about to make a new low, apparently. We'll check back in on the ES. Someone's ready to short Twitter, maybe if it breaks down underneath that low. An H pattern is basically a failed double bottom. No, an H pattern is basically a bear flag. Do I trade Forex? No, I do not trade Forex. I know nothing about the Forex markets. I'm not sure how the leverage works there. I'm not sure how the pairs work there. I've never traded it. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert there. I would recommend you go and find someone who actually trades it and can tell you more valuable information. We covered the Thinkorswim monkey bars. On expansion, no. We'll place it to the left. That's good to know. Thank you for that tip, YD. A couple other things before we get into it. Is there a way to get the TPOs on Thinkorswim from Kyle? I believe if you use the monkey bars, you can get the TPOs, but I'm not sure if it's the exact same thing. All right, so we've stalled long enough. We've got some names rolling into the chat. We're going to go in chronological order, and then we will catch anyone who's got a green name with their request as well. So Shop is up first as the first request here. What do we see on Shopify? As we discussed in yesterday's stream, let's go ahead and turn on the pre-market as well. There we go. I'm just going to quickly reduce the amount of time that we're seeing there so it's not so ugly every time. There we go. So as we were talking about yesterday, anything that remains underneath 668 is bearish in Shopify. As long as we remain below, continue to look for shorts, right? Your next trade is probably only if we can take out yesterday's low, noting that there was a pretty solid response from the buyers here, or maybe there's like an intraday, flush point that builds, descending triangle, crack that, then target yesterday's low. That could definitely be a possibility. But currently, I just wouldn't jump in short on the open based on where we're trading, all right? So Shopify, continue to lean short as long as we're under 668, but wait for a setup if you're not already in. If you are in, I would probably place a stop up and over yesterday's high just to protect yourself. If it wants to whip back in, it's probably going to the resistance trend line in 50 SMA, right? So that's Shopify. XELA, this is a cheaper stock, XELA. We were covering it over on the secondary channel as it was kind of doing its euphoric thing here just because, I was in that phase where I was kind of just trying to build that channel up a little bit, and I was just covering all the popular stock tickers. I don't actually trade anything that looks like this. I wouldn't recommend touching this with a 10-foot pole. If you want to trade it, that's absolutely fine. All the power to you, but I don't really see anything to do here. There's no reason to go long. I don't see the point in trying to fish for a double bottom here when the chart has clearly been, absolutely wrecked. It could have tried to put in, a higher low here for something that did this. Instead, we get a big double top, break of the neckline. It's back lower. Nothing about the pre-market volume looks exciting. There looks like there's a little bit of a spike. It doesn't mean it's going back up to 45 cents, right? So I can't really comment on this. I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't recommend anyone trades it. If it works for you, that's fine. But to me, it's not worth even looking at. It's kind of a waste of time. PLTR. We haven't talked about this one in a long time. PLTR. Oops, PLTR. There we go. It's been kind of caught, right? It's caught up in this range. It tried to make the move higher. I guess it's just like everything else. It's pulling back. It has that gap to trade for overhead. Let's clear up the drawing set. Your main thing is, can we get back above this, and can we also build out some sort of inverted head and shoulders? Of course, you want to see it hold up above 1216 at this point in time. So worst case scenario, if this does continue to dribble lower, it's got to support at 1216. If it breaks that, not a good look for the chart on the daily at least. You're more convinced long is up and over 1413. Basically, this resistance here, a little bit of a fake break, right? In terms of short-term trading, I would just say, if you're looking for a scalp, your long is probably up and over this resistance right here at 1321. You can see resistance, pre-market resistance, yesterday's high. If we break that, maybe there's a scalp to the long side there to get to the neckline. But currently, being so neutral in the midpoint of yesterday's range, not really seeing it as an obvious trade on the bell. So that's PLTR. Next up, we've got, what do we see? So CHPT, charge point, I believe that is. CHPT. Is that charge point? Quickly take a look. Yeah, charge point. What do we see in charge point? So a reasonable little pullback so far. Again, just like everything else, 2-day lows are stacked perfectly at 1715. If that breaks, that's your bear trade, just because it's a weak level, right? And your long trade is potentially here. Yep, just like, if there's a long trade in things that haven't taken out the prior day's high, you're basically looking to see if we have those equal highs here or some sort of structure to trade against. You can see we have resistance here on yesterday's open, pre-market resistance as well. So up and over 18, there's possibility for a long, just up to the prior day's high, right? I would start looking at 19 as a potential target here. Again, maybe some sort of break and retest for a higher low looks good. Some sort of tight consolidation just below and then a break looks good. If there's momentum, for momentum, you're obviously looking at volume. That's what I would say about that. And again, a break of the 2-day lows is your bearish trade. Anything that remains in this area, I would just be careful. It's probably going to be a little bit choppy, all right? So unless a clear pattern unfolds in there, again, I don't really see the reason to get overly aggressive in that range. Be patient. Wait for the setup to come to you, right? So that's what we've got for PLTR, and charge point MU is the next one. MU. What do we see in MU? We've got 9:15 for time too, by the way, guys. We're doing great. We can get through a decent amount of these. We have an inside bar set up on the daily, okay? So this is pretty powerful. Whenever you take out the outside bar, so the container bar, the one to the left, you're basically looking for an expansion of range. We get contraction. Next thing we're looking for is expansion, right? So one way or the other, it's got to be long up and over 74.75 and short down and out underneath 71.50. Now let's take a second here and go a step further than that. If it is long, where are we moving? Are we moving into like clear, easy sailing, blue skies? No. Look at all of this overhead supply, right? There's a decent possibility that even if this takes out the double top, it doesn't get too much traction. It might do something like this and stall around in this area. It's not like it would be much different if you had the inside bar set up here. So let's say there's bar 1, there's bar 2. If we were to take out the top, look left, right? This is a much better indication that, hey, we could be moving to this area here, right? Whereas where it's happening right here, look left, you get all this congestion, right? Maybe it's a move just up to here. Maybe it gets stalled out here. It just doesn't look as convincing, right? To the downside, a break of the 2-day bar lows basically takes you to here, which that level is 68.44, right? So that's what we've got inside of MU. Probably patience is the move. I wouldn't want to get chopped around in here. I would be more patient and wait for the cleaner trade one way or another. And just remember what we talked about to the upside. So that's MU. Let's continue along. What do we see up next? AgroRand. I think that's AgroLand. I don't know if that strikes me as it sounds very familiar, like a crypto coin. We're not going to cover crypto here on the stream. We already got charge point WOW, WOW. I don't know if that is that workout world. What is this? Wide open West. Interesting. Not workout world. Noted. Anyways, looks like there's going to be a pretty sizable, I don't know, the gap up isn't going to be sizable, but yesterday there must have been some news. Let's see what we have. Exploring options, including a sale. So maybe they're going to sell the company or they're going to get acquired by someone. I don't entirely know. I also wouldn't really recommend trading things that are so based on, a news spike. We closed right at 20. The chart, take this into consideration as well. Look at how this thing moves. Do you really want to be trading this? Do you really want to be trading this, right? Sure, there's a little bit of momentum going on here. There's a little bit of continued push into the pre-market, but look at how the average range on this thing is 55 cents, 48 cents, 36 cents, 32 cents, 39 cents as I'm hovering my cursor over some of these days. I would stay away from this. I don't see any reason to be trading this thing. If you think that it's going to continue to go higher, that's fine. All the power to you. You technically did close above resistance. Maybe your next target's closer to 21. I don't see the reason to be day trading this, especially on a Friday. I think there are far superior opportunities out there. So again, this is not my expertise. These sort of momentum-driven small cap stocks that no one's really heard of. That's not what I trade. I wish I could have a better comment for you, but I don't want to lead you astray, right? Maybe it goes higher, maybe it goes lower, right? I don't know what to tell you. There's no structure to trade off of based on yesterday's range here. I've got nothing. I've got nothing for you. So that's that one. DG, Dollar General's up next. That's a much better name. Thank you for getting us back on track here. Really solid move, right? Taking out these highs in here. At this point in time, I would say it's going to be a pretty difficult long to chase unless we get a pullback that gives us a break and retest, right? So something that does that, fantastic. Even if it wants to head a little bit lower and retest this 230, I would say that's okay. It's not ideal, but it's okay. It's okay. So as long as it produces a higher low, great. We have this phenomenon going on here. Looks good, continuing the uptrend. So that's my deepest pullback level based on the pre-market. Again, there's not a ton of volume going on here. The options, they're okay. They're not the greatest. If we just pop open here, you can see the open interest pretty light. Even if we go out to the monthlies here, a little bit better. So you get some 1000s here, nothing on the put side. So the options aren't great. And also look at the spread on the at the monies. I mean, a 20-cent spread on a $1 option, not really the greatest. So in terms of how it actually trades, I would be a little bit more careful and tactful about your entries. But nonetheless, I do like the fact that it's making a new all-time high. I want to see some sort of pullback for the next potential move higher. I wouldn't necessarily chase it up here. If you want to scalp it intraday and you're just looking for quick moves here and there, that's your pivot, right? 241.15, just based on early morning resistance, pulling back and offering support into the end of the day. So that's what we've got in Dollar General. Continuing along, we've got Costco, COST, from our friend Ashish with the green cash bag next to his name. Thank you for supporting the stream. I appreciate that. Big breakout yesterday, obviously following consumer staples and just, ripping to the upside here. There's a little bit of a gap that remains underneath us. I'm not saying that fills, obviously, but it's something to be mindful of if over the course of time there is some sort of pullback. Again, I don't know if chasing this here is the wisest decision. Notice that this has just been, up, 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 up. And this one's actually quite respectful, right? You can learn something about this. Look, break, consolidation. Break, consolidation. Are we going to get a break and new period of consolidation here? That's what I would watch out for. A couple of supports that you want to keep in mind. Use this as a zone, just like we talked about in Dollar General. Early morning resistance turns into support in the afternoon pullback. 604 down to about 603. Just treat that as a zone, right? It's not going to be exact. We're talking about a $600+ stock now. Give it a little bit of breathing room. It's okay if it doesn't hold this to the penny at that 604.65. So any consolidation up here strikes me as like the most optimal bullish form of consolidation. Scalps can be had up and over any opening range. If we dip our toe a little bit further underneath, I would just chalk today up as a consolidation day. Maybe we build out a daily balance for some consolidation up here, and then the next trade happens after a period of consolidation. So that's what we have in Costco. Just be careful. Don't, unless we have a clear balance or some sort of structure to trade against, I would not chase it long at the highs. And keep in mind, if you're trading 0 day to expiration options, you need to get direction right. If this starts chopping sideways because it's going to cool off and consolidate up here and you have options expiring today, not a good thing. Not a good thing, all right? So that's what I would be mindful of here inside of Costco. Hopefully that was a solid analysis for you there, Ashish. Continuing along, Vincent says CrowdStrike, CRWD. What do we have in CrowdStrike? Taking a quick look. Chart looks good. Just, without even zooming in too tight, you can see prior resistance, break, retest, starting to hold up on yesterday's session. Pre-market, a little bit volatile with these kind of odd, funky lower wicks. I don't know if those are true prints, but nonetheless, we're opening or slated to be opening above all of that morning consolidation, right? So is that a gap actually? Is that happening? Yeah, that is a gap. Okay. So gap rules could potentially be in play here. Basically on this one, because the gap is so small right here, I wouldn't necessarily want to trade for the gap, noting your risk is technically over the overnight high. Instead, if we fill the gap, you're looking for gap fill reversals off of yesterday's high, right? So 221.50s, as long as we support there, if you start seeing intraday double bottoms, so we do this and we just fail to get acceptance underneath that level, long over the neckline break, long over the opening print break, look for the overnight high. That would be the first target. Up here closer to that 228. It's also aligning quite nicely with the daily resistance up here as well. So that's what I would say about CrowdStrike. Watching for gap fill reversals, especially if the broad market is going to remain bullish. At 9:26, we will flip back on over to the ES and check in on that because we did start a little bit early today. I promised we would do a little update before the bell, but that's CrowdStrike. Anything that breaks underneath that 221.50 pivot, then look at what we have in yesterday's session. Look at what we have here. Maybe the short is back down towards 215. I would just still, I wouldn't necessarily be short here. Or looking for shorts until we crack this daily level at 212.50, right? If we start breaking down underneath this, shorts become more attractive, but in here, don't get chopped around is what I would say. So that's CrowdStrike. Robinhood is up next. We're going to sort of do a little bit of a speed round. Look at the daily chart again. I'm not saying that this thing can't slowly recover off these lows, but I mean, do you really want to invest or trade something that has price action like this? I think there's much better opportunities out there. In terms of what's going on, the chart even on the zoomed in time frame looks choppy. Here's a range. Whenever we're at the midpoint of a range, we know it's fairly choppy, and you don't really have an edge here. Your edge exists at the bottom. So I would be patient. I would wait for a continuation down closer to 10 again and see if we can get a little bit of a bounce. I would not be fishing for anything here around 11.14. Technically, this is a gap down. Gap rules will be in play, but again, do you want to really trade for this micro range right here? Doesn't strike me as the most attractive or lucrative setup. I think we've covered much better opportunities out there. Chart looks ugly, to be quite frank. Like, to put it as simple as possible, chart looks ugly. Maybe you could say that there's higher low possibility, but with the gap down, I mean, we're already going to be making a new lower low underneath yesterday's low, right? Doesn't strike me as the most solid form of strength. So hood. What do I think about the 9 EMA on the 5-minute for scalping? Seems to be working pretty well. Yeah, if it works for you, all the power to you. If you find something that works for you, fantastic. I have used the 9 EMA and VWAP combination in the past. It's a pretty good setup. I'll give you that. It's a pretty good setup for catching pullbacks. Next up, we've got SE, C Limited. What do we see in this chart? Daily balance, still stuck in it. We're opening off the low end of the range, so you people who like aggressive risk-on type stuff, I wouldn't go with today's expiration, but if you want to take some options that are long here, looking to target that 132 top of the balance with a stop just underneath the lows, great. I mean, look at your risk reward. If you're entering here, so let it show and prove that it wants to hold. And if it starts to move higher, so if we take out like 117 coming from prior support, which then flip to resistance, or maybe you want to be a little bit more conservative and wait for a break of this area 120, fine. Look at your risk reward. Even if you go to 120, your risk is here. Your reward is up here. Makes sense, right? So that's more of a swing trade type idea here. It doesn't mean you can't use this information to scalp also, right? For scalpers, you're just looking for that run higher, right? So that's what I would say about SE. The only short trade is if we get firm price acceptance underneath 114, 113, 75, something that does this for a clear lower high, right? That's your short trade there. So 926, I said we'd check in quickly on our futures. I'm quickly gonna make sure that we don't have any other green names who requested something, and it looks like no, we do not. So we're gonna check in on the futures, making a new overnight low. Good thing we checked. So coming back down a little bit more firmly into range, to me, this is just increasing the odds that we see balance on the open, increasing the odds that we need to be a little bit more patient here. Ideally, this will hold up at value area high. We'll get acceptance above and do something like this. Then maybe it's back up towards yesterday's high, overnight high. If not, and we get back down into value area, we know that that's really an opportunity for chop, right? Two-sided back and forth trade to resume taking place. You would wait for an opening range break, some sort of structural pattern that develops. Based on the open here, I'm not really seeing an obvious reason to go long or short right out of the bell, right? There's no imbalance in the inventory currently. If anything, this is even getting us to a more balanced situation in the futures, noting that here we had short activity, there we had long activity, now we're getting some more short activity underneath yesterday's close. It's balancing it out. When we first did our 3 questions, we were saying maybe it was like 80-20 net long. Now it's certainly switched up a little bit, right? I would probably say it's something like 60-40 net long, just because there still is, on a net basis, more activity above than below our close from yesterday, right? So balanced, neutral, not really a whole lot to say here in terms of the open and direction. We did a pretty thorough walkthrough on why we think that the sectors are poised in a position where things might have a solid turnaround today. But again, if we don't get any acceptance above the highs, if we don't really see this hold up here, let's just go to the SPY daily to talk about this. It might be a little bit easier before we wrap up the stream. If we don't really see anything, hold up above that 446, even just the lows, the 2-day lows, then there's no reason to go long yet, right? There's no reason to go long yet. We're waiting basically for the capture of this. Boom. There you go. Resistance trend line's the target. So that's, the game plan hasn't really changed. Sure, the overnight range is a little bit different now, but it's still patience on the open. We were going to be patience on the open even up here, and we were going to watch to see if we could get that value area high pullback. Looks like it's already unfolding. Let's see if it holds, right? If value area holds, it's a bullish indication that value may very well be established higher on today's session, right? So just to show you that on our market profile chart, like if we get value that is established up here today, so we do something like this, that might have been a little aggressive to the upside. So let me just retry that. If we get value that does something like this, it's clearly, higher. So as long as we hold up at value area high, we don't dip too far underneath, fine. Still kind of neutral to slightly bullish. Note again, the sellers couldn't make anything happen underneath that level we talked about at the overnight low on yesterday's session, right? This was a pretty weak level. We would have expected more follow through. Simply didn't happen. All right, so that's all I've got for you on a Friday. Remember, trade safe out there. Don't do anything silly with 0 DTE expirations. They will burn you, and you don't want to go into the weekend resenting the market. It'll lead to a pretty poor next week. Trust me, been there, done that. We've got about 30 seconds to the bell. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. On your way out, if you don't mind, hit the thumbs up button. Enjoy your weekends. Again, stay safe out there in terms of 0 DTEs. Join the Discord if you haven't already, and I wish you all a green trading day. bell.